Warning: these social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre.
Well, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Spectre here. It is now the 5th day of November. This is a day that the Lord has made. We shall rejoice and be glad in it on this day. Got a good day in the middle part of the country here. Sun is shining. Nice, crisp fall day. Hopefully you guys are doing well wherever you guys may be here this morning. Looks like weather-wise, we got a pretty good day in store across the old U.S. of A. here. A little bit of rain, down in the very far southeast. Georgia, South Carolina, Florida area, and of course up in the northwest. Otherwise, the middle part of the country looking pretty doggone good. So aside from that, we got quite a few things to cover here this morning by way of some payroll reports, things going on in Bitcoin, of course, what's been going on with the supply chain, you name it, and a couple other odds and ends. So I'll see you back here in just a minute.
Hey everybody, Spectre here. Want to tell you about my Teespring store that I just opened up with a handful of products in that for you guys, the listeners, the audience, those that are in chat on a day in, day out basis. Always appreciate your support, and I figured what the heck, we'll throw some merch out there for you guys. And so obviously with YouTube and Earth Shenanigans as of late, I'm going to be looking to expand to other platforms, and well, that all comes at a cost, so I figured what the heck. That being said, I got some t-shirts and that out here. You can see those in black, white, and gray. Spectre Does News. Got a water tumbler, 20 ounce there. Got a coffee mug you can get in black or white. And of course, we got the Let's Go Brandon #FJB shirt, which you can also find in black, white, or gray. Right now, you can find that all over at https specters-storefront.creator-spring.com. That's https://specters-storefront.creator-spring.com. Thank you for your support.
All right, welcome back. Right into it we go. Futures melt up to new record ahead of high ahead of payrolls. U.S. index futures continued their relentless melt up on the last day of the week before today's jobs report, which is expected to bounce strongly from last month's disappointing print. Expected 450,000, up from 194,000, and could set the pace for the Fed's taper into 2022 if it is too much of an outlier in either direction. At 7:30 a.m., E-mini S&P futures were up 8.25 or 0.18% to 4681.5, a new all-time high. Nasdaq futures rose 48 points or 0.29%, and Dow futures were up 35 or 0.1%. 10-year yields were flat at 1.53%, and the dollar index jumped while Brent traded just above $80 after yesterday's rout. So, of course, as usual, E-mini S&P futures where they are currently tracking. Says investors took comfort from the Federal Reserve's slow and steady approach when announcing the timeline for its taper program, said Michael Hewson, chief market analyst at CMC Markets in London. Today's payrolls report should confirm that the U.S. labor market is still improving. After one of the busiest earnings days this season, it has been a furious session with Expedia News jumping in pre-market trading on better-than-expected results. Airbnb jumped 7.7% after the travel website reported record sales and earnings that exceeded analyst estimates. Meanwhile, Peloton crashed 33% after the fitness company cut its annual revenue forecast by as much as $1 billion because of declining demand in the post-pandemic economy. Here are some of the biggest U.S. movers today. As mentioned, Peloton shares tanked 32% in U.S. pre-market trading after analysts said its results and reduced guidance implied weaker demand than expected, and that the home fitness company's business model may need a rethink. Square shares dropped 4.5% in U.S. pre-market trading after its third quarter results fell short of the consensus estimate, but its outlook remains strong, analysts say. The weakness in its Cash App and Bitcoin revenue could have been predicted, they added. Airbnb shares rose 8% in the U.S. pre-market after the vacation rental giant reported record sales and earnings that beat analysts' estimate. RBC and Barclays hiked their price targets, citing improving earnings and supply and demand dynamics in 2022. NRx Pharmaceuticals and Relief Therapeutics, which are partners on a drug to treat COVID-19, tumbled after the U.S. Food and Drug Administration declined to issue an emergency use authorization for the medication. Perhaps you're not part of the big club after all, like the Pfizer and Moderna's and Johnson & Johnson's, I take it. Anyway, Gopro shares rose 17.2% pre-market Tuesday after the maker, I'm assuming they meant Thursday, after the maker of mountable and wearable cameras reported third quarter results that exceeded analyst estimates. Expedia shares rally in pre-market trading as the online travel agency reports third quarter revenue and adjusted earnings that beat expectations. The company's CEO also gave positive commentary about a recovery in the travel industry. Novavax climbs as much as 6% after the biotech company said it filed with the World Health Organization for emergency use listing for its COVID vaccine. Pinterest rises 5% in pre-market trading after the company reported stronger than expected profit and revenue that met analyst estimates. Microchip gains 2.5% in pre-market trading after projecting revenue and adjusted earnings per share that exceeded the average analyst estimates. OnTrack jumped 24% post-market after the telehealth company boosted its full-year guidance. Grid Dynamics jumped 18% in post-market trading after the information technology services company forecasts full-year revenue that beat the average analyst estimate. And Pfizer surged more than 10% after the company announced it would seek approval for a new COVID pill after strong trial data. So yes, Pfizer still on the march. And of course, flashing down to the old market snapshot here this morning, S&P 500 futures little change at 46.74 and a quarter. Stocks Europe 600 up 0.1% to 483 and change. It looks like the Nikkei is down 0.6% to 29,611 and change. Shanghai Composite down 1% to 3491.57. Brent futures were up 0.8% to 81.22 a barrel. Gold spot up 0.4% to 1798.55 per ounce. And the US dollar index little changed at 94.35. Some other overnight news out of Bloomberg. Germany reported record COVID-19 infections for a second straight day as a fourth wave of the scamdemic hits Europe and threatens to overwhelm hospitals in some hotspots. Oh, here we go. Gotta strike up that fear, don't we? The increasingly influential expectations gap between bond traders and central bankers faces a fresh test Friday. U.S. jobs data that could reignite or damp out the inflation concerns policymakers tried to downplay this week. Also, a shortage of homes for sale and a buoyant labor market are expected to underpin the UK housing market as consumers come under pressure from soaring inflation and higher interest rates, according to Halifax. Over to News Squawk and back over to Asia. Japan eases many COVID-era border restrictions as cases slump. Developer in China misses payment on loan backed by Fantasia. World's largest pension fund, GPIF, posts $17 billion gain. And HSBC requests all of its Hong Kong staff to get the jab. Interesting. Also in Europe, Adler pressure builds with idle cranes and angry Berlin buyers. AXA, jumps to more than 3-year high after share buyback plan. Europe gas prices rebound as traders eye Russia's next move. And the ECB's Guindos says inflation will slow in 2022 without a doubt. I guess they can read the old crystal ball, can't they? On the old event calendar today, a couple things. 8:30 a.m. this morning, we got October change in non-farm payrolls, estimate of 450,000. Prior was 194, as mentioned previously. Change in private payrolls, estimate of 420 versus a prior 317,000. Unemployment rate, estimate of 4.7% versus a prior 4.8. Underemployment rate, prior was 8.5%. Labor force participation rate, estimate of 61.7, prior was a 61.6. Average hourly earnings year over year, estimate of 4.9 versus a prior 4.6. Average hourly earnings month over month, estimate of 0.4 versus a 0.6. Average weekly hours, all employees estimate 34.8 versus the same. And at 3 p.m., September consumer credit estimate of 16 billion versus a prior print of 14.4 billion. So, quick run through of what is going on in the old markets, or lack thereof, this morning. Take your pick. And of course, Friday here, we've got a handful of before bell earnings and that coming through. Coinbase coming through for those following the old cryptos. Goodyear, Dominion Energy, Magna, a couple to name a few. And of course, we had a few reports yesterday from Uber and Airbnb, Peloton, that we just got done discussing as well. So it kind of hit the highlights of those. All right, so that being said, coking coal has a branding problem. Interesting piece out of Doomberg's Substack here. Says, I'm sorry to bang on about coal, but it makes you look like a little bit weaselly, not answering the coal question, according to Justin Rowlett. The world is gathered in Glasgow for COP26, and on the opening morning we were treated to quite the spectacle on the BBC. Justin Rowlett, the BBC's climate editor, took British Prime Minister Bojo to task for not doing enough to rule out a new coal mine currently under construction in the UK. That's Rowlett below, foaming with total indignation that Johnson could even fathom allowing such a project to proceed. Whoa, scary stuff. Justin Rowlett, BBC climate editor, at the same time saying as not ruling out a new coal mine in Britain. Flustered by the line of attack, Johnson retreated to citing statistics about how coal has become almost irrelevant to the UK power grid. Well, not necessarily true, because even the day before, I believe, we highlighted an article that says, oh, guess what? There just wasn't quite enough wind circulating yesterday at the start of the COP26, and they had to refire up the coal plant. So there's that. Says, when I was a kid, 80% of our power came from coal. When I was mayor of London, it was 40%. It's now 1%. Not satisfied with that answer, Rowlett interrupts Johnson. Let's talk about coal. And I know everybody asks you this question, but you're going to China, you're going to India, you're going to the developing world saying, phase out coal. At the same time saying, as not ruling out a new coal mine in Britain. A new coal mine in Britain? We started the Industrial Revolution. We should have closed the mines. I'm not sure what's more hysterical or horrifying, but the climate editor for the BBC seems to have no earthly idea what he is talking about, or that the British Prime Minister seems to have no earthly idea what he is talking about. The coal mine at issue would have been in Cumbria, and it was to produce coking coal, not thermal coal. We use the past tense because it is clear this mine is never opening. Now, coking coal is not burned to make electricity. Coking coal is used along with iron ore to make steel. If the world cannot produce steel, much of the world economy grinds to a halt. Unfortunately for coking coal, it has coal in its name. Unfortunately for the renewable power industry, they're going to need a lot of coking coal. This seems like quite the conundrum. For example, it is well known that the production of wind turbines consumes a lot of steel. At least we thought it was well known. The picture below shows a popular tubular steel tower design. It's a similar story with electric vehicles, and all manner of stuff required to enable the green revolution. There is no path to meaningfully reducing CO2 emissions that doesn't involve the use of massive amounts of steel. Is the production of steel a dirty business? Absolutely. It accounts for nearly 8% of global CO2 emissions. Are there ways to reduce that impact, and should they be implemented? No doubt. Is China's steel industry measurably dirtier than mills in the United States and Europe? Unquestionably. Think they care what we do? Nope. The world will keep mining coking coal and making steel as it always has. It'll just be much more expensive and less environmentally friendly than it could have otherwise been, which will further impede the implementation of the renewable energy revolution. Coking coal mines in Russia and China will continue cranking out product with far fewer environmental protections than Cumbria would have implemented. Huge dry bulk cargo ships will meander around the globe, packed with coking coal from exporting countries like Canada and Australia, polluting the oceans in the process. As with many fundamental commodities, the price of coking coal has soared to eye-watering levels in the past few months, albeit for reasons mostly unrelated to the Cumbria standoff. We were already writing a piece on arbitrage and the coking coal market when the BBC clip crossed our Twitter feed. We hope to get that one done before too long. And of course, per their own tracking mechanism here we see what coking coal apparently has ticked up to. Says critics will point out that the production of green steel, an innovative set of technologies that rely on hydrogen instead of coal, is just over the horizon. We certainly hope so, but we note that the hydrogen will have to come from fossil fuels or, gasp, nuclear power, because otherwise the production of green hydrogen at scale will rely on the very same yet-to-be-built renewable energy infrastructure that will consume massive amounts of steel. How's that for the circle of life? We don't doubt that steam, reforming natural gas to produce the hydrogen necessary to make green steel a reality, would lead to substantial reductions in CO2 emissions. After listening to that BBC interview, we have grave doubts using natural gas for this process will be considered acceptable. It's a fossil fuel, after all, and better isn't better when only zero will do. Anyway, that mine is never getting permitted, and, to borrow a phrase from a former British Prime Minister with a little more shrewdness than Mr. Johnson, we shall continue attempting to lift ourselves out of the bucket we are currently standing in by pulling on the handle. So there you have it. Idiots. And this is what happens with the Mockingbird media, who does not have a clue. Coal is coal is coal to them, right? And of course, they have no idea that all this green energy, of course, relies on other dirty processes behind the scenes. And oh, by the way, while we're talking wind farms, let's talk a little bit about those non-renewable, non-recyclable blades that just pile up in landfills around the country and countryside, right? What are we going to do with all that? Just a thought. Green my posterior. Anyway, depleted U.S. oil inventories leave market vulnerable to shocks. John Kemp, out of Reuters energy analyst and columnist, says U.S. petroleum consumption has returned to pre-pandemic levels as businesses have reopened and internal road and air travel has resumed. But production and refining are lagging behind, which has depleted stocks. Now, mind you, just 1 year ago, if you recall, several articles that said the U.S. was pretty much energy independent under DJT. My, how times have changed in just a quick 12 months. Where did all the petro go? Last week, the total volume of petroleum products supplied to the domestic market averaged 20 million barrels per day, essentially the same as the pre-pandemic 5-year seasonal average for 2015 to 2019. Of the major fuels, volumes of gasoline and distillate supplied are running at or marginally above pre-pandemic rates, while jet fuel is still somewhat below, reflecting continued problems in the aviation industry. But the volume of crude processed by refineries has been running roughly 5% below pre-pandemic rates, putting downward pressure on inventories of refined fuels. By the end of last week, gas stocks were 5 million barrels below their pre-pandemic seasonal average, while distillate stocks were 6 million barrels below, according to the EIA report from November 3rd. And there we see that graphically. It says domestic crude production also remains well below pre-pandemic levels, which has resulted in an even stronger drawdown in crude inventories. Commercial crude inventories ended last week, 18 million barrels, or about 4% below the pre-pandemic average, with the most severe shortage concentrated at Cushing, where stocks were down 25 million barrels. And apparently we see that depicted here. The acute shortage at Cushing, which is the delivery point for the NYMEX crude futures contract, helped push nearby futures into their second steepest backwardation in the last decade. And here we see the West Texas Intermediate 6-month calendar spread, 1990 to 2021. And it also says, more broadly, total stocks of crude and products outside the Strategic Petroleum Reserve had fallen to their lowest level since 2014. And here we see that depicted. But there are some tentative signs that the supply situation is stabilizing. Deficits in both crude and products inventories to the pre-pandemic 5-year average have narrowed slightly since late September. Likely in response, WTI futures pricing for deliveries in December 2021 have been trending gently downward since October 26th, and the 6-month calendar spread has been softening since October 29th, though it is too early to determine whether this marks a turning point or simply a temporary pullback. And here's looking at the Cushing crude oil inventories and WTI calendar spread. For what it's worth, the overall supply situation remains tight. Depleted inventories mean there are few shock absorbers to cope with any unexpected interruption in output or stronger than anticipated growth in consumption. So yeah, if we were to get a, say, hurricane on the Gulf or anything along those lines that might shut down some platforms, you can imagine what is going to happen. Crude oil stocks at Cushing 2005 to 2021 on the downhill slide says at this point, supply problems or unexpected strength in demand could result in sharp price increases because there is no slack left to absorb them in the short term, unless OPEC Plus can be persuaded to increase its output faster. And we see how well that has worked out for creepy Uncle Joe and trying to push that rope. Not going too well. And again, just 1 year ago, one 12-month period ago, we were energy independent, exporting energy. Believe that? Nonetheless, California forced to embrace natural gas. So, like the opening story here talking about what's going on in the UK and their woes and everything else, well, apparently there just must not be enough solar panels on people's roofs and enough, turbines and that to power all of California's needs. So they got to embrace the dirty energy, don't they? So, out of Irina Slav over at Oil Price, severe droughts and wildfires this year have pushed California to turn to natural gas in order to secure its energy supplies this winter, Reuters has reported, with the California Public Utility Commission to vote this week on expanding the gas storage facility in Los Angeles. Interesting. All this talk of green energy this, green energy that, COP26, all of that. The exact opposite is happening. Coal is through the roof. We've talked about that over the last several weeks. They're sold out. Peabody Energy through 2022 into 2023. Natural gas, they're expanding supply. And storage. We're going the wrong direction. Droughts severely cut hydropower generation in the state, while wildfires compromised electricity imports, which are a big part of California's energy mix. The state also has plans to shut down 4 gas-fired plants and its nuclear plant, and last month, the PUC ordered utilities to start buying renewable power and battery storage, the Wall Street Journal reported. While the companies are moving quickly to contract for power, the California Energy Commission and the state's grid operator have recently expressed concern that the purchases may not be enough to prevent electricity shortages in coming summers, the report said. Per the Reuters report, also this week, regulators will vote on increasing the amount of gas stored at the biggest gas storage facility in California, according to Aliso Canyon. And there we see some of the stuff going on there. Says the facility is problematic. 6 years ago, a months-long leak made headlines, and there have been suggestions that it must be shut down. The problems with Aliso Canyon have contributed to California's tight gas supplies, along with a lack of pipelines. But, according to PUC Commissioner Martha Guzman Aceves, A small boost in capacity will allow us to get through this winter while we continue our progress toward planning how to reduce or eliminate our use of Aliso Canyon by 2027 or 2035, or any time in between. Until that happens, the planned closure of gas-fired plants could be delayed yet again. Initially, they were scheduled for retirement last year, but fears of blackouts in the evenings when demand rises but solar power output declines prompted a postponement. Now, one will be shut down this year and the other 3 in 2023. So, if you're in California, chances are whoever's left that hasn't fled to, Texas, Florida, or any other freer state, well, you can probably expect that you're going to have some rolling blackouts. That's going to be in your future, right? Welcome to the Green New Deal. So aside from that, Duke Energy warns of higher power prices as tight coal and gas supplies loom this winter. Duke Energy Corporation warned Thursday that coal and natural gas supplies would be tight this winter, resulting in higher power prices for customers. Duke operates a diverse mix of power plants, including coal, hydro, natural gas, nuclear, solar, and wind, and battery storage facilities across several regions and states, including the Carolinas, Florida, and Midwest. Duke Energy CFO Steve Young said coal and natural gas prices are the highest since 2014, and these two essential commodities are in short supply. It's been a while since we've seen commodity prices like this. The winter of 2014, we had a very cold polar vortex winter, and we saw a spiking of gas prices, Young said, who was quoted by Bloomberg on Thursday. He noted that Duke has adequate coal and gas reserves for this fall and winter, but stressed a shortage of supplies in the overall commodity market has forced prices higher. And there we see coal futures, natural gas futures, net both on the rise. Says Young said its fossil fuel power generation plants would pass on higher costs to customers. Higher power prices will be another blow to consumers who have already had their real wages crushed by soaring food, gas, and shelter costs. Regions that rely more on gas or coal for heat and electricity will see rates increase more than regions where a greater proportion of power comes from nuclear, hydropower, or renewable energy, he said. And of course, here we see the mix of Duke power plants net all across the U.S. here, from Virginia, North, South Carolina, down into Florida. Got a few back up through the Ohio River Valley in that area. And it says the cause of the energy crunch is due to the rising global demand for fossil fuel as the global energy transition to alternative power sources, such as solar and wind, has been nothing short of a disaster. Ernie Thrasher, CEO of X-Coal Energy and Resources, the largest U.S. exporter of fuel, also warned about coal supply constraints. He said power companies are already discussing possible grid blackouts this winter. Last month, NOAA's 2021 Winter Outlook was published. For the second consecutive winter, it outlined that La Nina conditions are emerging and will impact weather across the U.S. Consistent with typical La Nina conditions during winter months, we anticipate below normal temperatures along portions of the northern tier of the U.S., while much of the south experience above normal temperatures, the report said. Heating demand across the country is rising as temps drop. In short, the millions of Americans that rely on Duke for power could be slapped with higher power bills if cold weather is seen. More evidence that inflation is not as quote-unquote transitory as the Federal Reserve wants everyone to believe. That's right, don't believe your lying eyes. Oh, those high prices that you see at the gas station and in your food supermarkets, don't believe that. That's not really real, according to the Fed, right? So then we get this. Global food prices hit fresh decade high in October. And in October, global food prices continued climbing higher for the third straight month, hitting fresh decade highs led by vegetable oils and cereals. High food costs contribute to more inflationary pressures for the working poor, central banks, and governments. The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization's Food Price Index, which tracks a basket of food commodities, averaged 133.2 in October, up 3.9 points, or about 3%, from September, and 31.8 points, or 31.33%, from October 2020. The index has risen 3 consecutive months and is now at a new decade high, could hit record highs in 2022. So, yes, obviously still rising. World vegetable oil and cereal prices were the two biggest movers in the index. Edible oils jumped 9.6% on the month to set a record high. Cereal prices rose 3.2% within the basket. Wheat jumped 5%. A combination of bad weather in the Americas, higher shipping costs, and labor shortages have disrupted global food supply chains. The latest energy crunch has sent fertilizer prices sky high and will increase food prices in 2022. The issue with the inputs and fertilizers and its implications for next year's crop is a concern, said Abdulreza Abbasian, a senior economist at the UN's Food and Ag Organization. By now, the market has factored in most of the supply and demand issues, but the market has by no means factored in next year's prospects in production, said Abbasian. He warned, "We cannot afford a bad year in 2022 for import crops. This has reignited memories of food price spikes a decade ago, which caused unrest in emerging market economies." SocGen's Albert Edwards first warned that soaring food prices could contribute to socioeconomic destabilization right before the virus pandemic began. Already, we've reported food inflation and shortages have hit supermarkets, not just in emerging markets, but also in the developed world. In the U.S., Mondelez CEO Dirk Van de Put told CNBC Tuesday that Oreo cookies, Ritz crackers, and Sour Patch Kids will be more expensive next year. There's been chatter that Nabisco, PepsiCo, and Coca-Cola will be raising prices, and Kraft Heinz has told consumers that they must get used to higher prices. Consumers are spending more on food than a year ago. Some have blamed President Biden for the inflation eating away their real wages as polling numbers for the president sink. And yes, continued downward trend. And of course, they overlay that with the FAO Global Food Price Index inverted, both trending downward. The Virginia governor's race was a wake-up call for Dems that Biden's Build Back Better plan is not working. People are starting to get irritated as inflation appears not to be, quote-unquote, transitory. However, I digress from that and say this. Yesterday we covered a piece out of the Daily Reckoning that said, what if this is their plan? You know, we talked about that. They love the idea of people suffering. That's what gets their jollies off at the end of the day. They love to see people suffer. They want these shortages. Perhaps that is their plan all along. And so it's going to come down to we the people to fix this. It's not going to come by the hand of government intervention. And so the people like PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Nabisco, do we really, really, really need them? Or can we get it done on our own? Just a thought. And so we get this. There's been some interesting developments here as of late with what's been going on with Bitcoin. And I semi-pontificated about this a little bit on Wednesday over on the 5x5 channel, talking that, what is the one thing that we, the people, can do to kind of undermine things, if you will? What binds us all? Right? At the end of the day, we look at our governments and we say, well, the government's really not in charge, it's the corporations. They're the ones giving the edicts and decrees. They're the ones that are bought off by the Pfizers, the AstraZenecas, you name it. So what is the one thing that we, the people, can do? If we got ourselves off of the U.S. dollar, the fiat currency, would that change? And I asked that question. Well, interestingly enough, just that night, we saw an article come through that says the Miami mayor is switching all of his salary over to Bitcoin. And then we get an article yesterday that says the newly elected mayor of New York is going to take 3 months of his salary in Bitcoin. And now we get this. The world's biggest podcaster, Joe Rogan, accepts Bitcoin payment. So, love or hate Bitcoin, as I've mentioned before, it is not the solution, but it is certainly a solution. Is it possible that this could basically relegate governments obsolete and banksters as well? I don't know. It's a question. So we get this piece out of Alex McShane over at BitcoinMagazine.com. Says Joe Rogan, the world's most successful podcaster and comedian, has accepted a Bitcoin payment of $100,000. The podcast host and MMA commentator has talked about Bitcoin in the past on his show, but accepting Bitcoin as payment marks a definitive switch in stance on his part. During the Joe Rogan Experience, episode number 1728, about 56 minutes and 30 seconds in, frequent guest and comedian Ari Schaffer boasted to fellow comics Mark Normand and Shane Gillis on behalf of their friend. Joe, got a deal for over $100,000, Schaffer said. It's not in American money, Joe deflected, brushing off his fellow comics' antics. It's all in Bitcoin. So let's take a quick listen.
Down. Not my bank account, bitch. Yeah, I bet you.
And apparently it's not.
Be all right with the... Joe got a deal for over one.
Yeah, it's not going to want to cooperate here this morning for whatever reason. If this encounter is any indication of Rogan's stance on Bitcoin, and if it is in fact true that he was paid over 1.5 Bitcoin by today's prices, the occasion marks a shift in his understanding of the world's most sound store of value. In the past, Rogan has dismissed Bitcoin on his show as a Ponzi scheme, which is an opinion many form when hearing about the success of Bitcoin's early adopters, prior to doing their homework on the composition of the leaderless, ungovernable asset. However, one of the more captivating and humanizing traits of the internet legend is that Rogan frequently revises his opinions on topics throughout the episodes when presented with good information. In a February 2019 episode with Twitter and Square CEO Jack Dorsey, who is an extremely active promoter of Bitcoin, Joe commented, "One of the things that's kind of cool about the Cash App is that you can buy and sell Bitcoin with it." Rogan went on to ask whether Dorsey would allow other cryptocurrencies outside of Bitcoin to be bought and sold on the platform. Dorsey then explained to Rogan how Bitcoin will become the native currency of the internet, the trials that have strengthened it, and what is likely to propel Bitcoin to becoming a global store of value and reserve asset. During that episode with Dorsey, Rogan, for perhaps the first time, talked about Bitcoin seriously as a disruptive technology. This is another step towards a new way of doing things, he remarked at the time. In the past, he has cited popular Bitcoin educators Max Kaiser and Andreas Antonopoulos, showing something more than a surface-level interest. Joe Rogan's acceptance of Bitcoin on any scale will be celebrated by people who have Bitcoin by sheer virtue of his reach, which is, in some ways, unquantifiable. It is estimated his podcast reaches over 11 million people per show. Over the years, he has brought considerable influence and unprecedented attention to the arts of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, MMA, elk hunting, bow shooting, biohacking, comedy, health and fitness, self-improvement, clean eating, and podcasting in general. One can only hope Rogan will continue to research Bitcoin, come to understand the fundamental differences between it and the other crypto securities, and share his Bitcoin journey with the world. And I guess I'll pontificate a little bit on that and say, yes, indeed, Rogan has the reach. You don't have to look too much further than what just happened with Rogan having Sanjay Gupta on from Clown News. And of course, Clown News tried to paint him as a heretic, basically, saying that he took horse dewormer to get better, and then promptly went on Clown News and lied about it. Gaslight the populace, the 30 or 40 people that still watch Clown News. And then, immediately after Sanjay Gupta's interview with Rogan, went back with Don Lemon and did the very same thing. So at the end of the day, who's really got the reach and the influence? Clown News or Joe Rogan? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. So outside of that, as mentioned at the top of the broadcast, October payroll soared to 531,000, smashing expectations as prior months revised sharply higher. So after 2 months of dismal job reports, the BLS finally redeemed itself when moments ago it reported that in October the U.S. gained some 531,000 jobs, well above the 450,000 consensus expected and above the 500,000 whisper number. The gain in payrolls was also bigger than all but 10 of the 75 forecast in Bloomberg survey. And here we see that clear out at the end. Remarkably, the private payrolls print was a stellar 604,000, with government jobs shrinking by 73,000 in October. Just as importantly, the September print was revised solidly higher from 194,000 to 312,000, as was August, up from 366 to 483,000. With these revisions, employment in August and September combined is 235,000 higher than previously reported. In any case, payrolls are now 4.2 million lower than the peak reached before the scamdemic, February 2020. Naturally, this is better than the nearly 5 million we had in September. And here we see that ratcheting back up. Presumably this takes us all the way back to, March timeframe of last year. Peak, I suppose, payrolls net prior to the scamdemic. Says, and there were some very good news for the U.S. manufacturing sector, which saw jobs jump by 60,000 in October, double the expected 30,000. And that takes us back to, probably June of last year levels as well. We will have a more detailed breakdown later, but despite the solid headline print, leisure and hospitality hiring is still looking slower than before the Delta wave, although it is picking up a bit at plus 164,000 in October. August and September were also revised up a bit to 71,000 and 88,000 respectively. Validating the solid headline print was the household survey, which showed that the number of employed Americans jumped by 359,000 from 153.68 thousand to 154.039 thousand, and with the number of unemployed dropping from 7.674 million to 7.419 million. The unemployment rate dropped from 4.8% to 4.6%, below the 4.7% expected. Says the labor participation rate was unchanged at 61.6% as the labor force rose modestly by just over 100,000. Commenting on the flat print, Ross Mayfield, an analyst at Baird, sees the LFP rate as a weak spot again. Would love to start seeing that move higher as COVID wanes to show expanding labor supply and help ease some of those pressure, but a really strong report overall. There was more good news, with average hourly earnings rising from 4.6 to 4.9% year over year, even if the monthly increase dipped modestly from 0.6 to 0.4%. Digging a bit deeper, we find that the wage growth is surging in leisure and hospitality, where it jumped 12.4% year over year, as retailers still can't find workers. But even in the rest of the labor market, wage growth of 5.9% is also basically the highest since the early 1980s. Average weekly hours worked dipped slightly to 34.7 from 34.8, and this measure had been elevated, as expected. Any time when employers can't find workers, they ask existing ones to work longer. So the dip in October could suggest that there's an ever so slight reduction in pressures. And here is the breakdown of all that. I'm not going to take the time to get into all that. But employment, leisure, hospitality increased 164, professional business up 100,000, employment manufacturing up 60,000, employment transportation warehouse increased by 54,000, construction employment 44, healthcare added 37, October employment retail rose by 35,000, etc., etc. Bottom line, definitely a positive, eases any lingering stagflation fears and shows signs that COVID headwinds are waning. Or is it? They got to keep this train a-rolling down the tracks with all this fear porn, don't they? So will we see anything by what we talked about previously out of Germany? Perhaps a fourth wave? Who knows? We can't get a little too over-exuberant, now can we? So outside of some financial news here this morning, interesting news out of Michigan here. It says breaking, lawsuit filed against Michigan's dishonest Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Legal group found nearly 26,000 potentially dead voters on voter rolls, 4,000 dead for at least 20 years. That's out of 100% fed up. Says yet another lawsuit has been filed against Michigan's dishonest Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. The lawsuit filed by the Public Interest Legal Foundation accuses Benson of neglecting her duty to remove dead voters from the voter rolls in violation of the Department of Justice's NVRA, the National Voter Registration Act. The NVRA clearly states that election officials must, quote, conduct a general program that makes a reasonable effort to remove the names of ineligible voters from the official list of eligible voters, end quote. The watchdog group discovered one registered voter who died over 2 decades ago, yet is still on the voter rolls. If she were alive today, she would be 100 years old. They also found another registered voter who would be 108 years old today if she didn't die over 2 decades ago. The Public Interest Legal Foundation found obituaries for both of the deceased women in the Detroit Free Press, and one had an image of her gravestone online. In a written statement, J. Christian Adams, president of Public Interest League Foundation, claimed this case is about ensuring that deceased registrants are not receiving ballots. For over a year, we've shared specific data with the Michigan Secretary of State's office about the alarming problem of deceased registrants on Michigan's voter rolls, Adams said, adding, Secretary Benson has done nothing to resolve the problem and is even refusing to hand over public documents related to these failures. The failure to remove deceased registrants creates an opportunity for fraud and makes Michigan's elections less secure. The nonpartisan, nonprofit, public interest organization, Public Interest Legal Foundation, filed a suit against Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson yesterday in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Michigan. Says after analyzing the Michigan's voter rolls and verifiable death records, the Public Interest Legal Foundation revealed that, as of August 2021, 25,975 potentially deceased registrants are on Michigan's voter rolls. 23,663 of those deceased registrants have been dead for 5 years or more. 17,479 of those deceased registrants have been dead for at least 10 years. 3,956 of those deceased registrants have been dead for at least 20 years. The lawsuit accuses defendant Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson as the Chief Election Officer of Michigan of violating the following requirements in Section 8 of the NVRA, which states, it requires Michigan to conduct a general program that makes a reasonable effort to remove the names of non-eligible voters from the official list of eligible voters by reason of, inter alia, the death of the registrant. Section 8 of the NVRA also requires that Michigan shall complete, not later than 90 days prior to the date of a primary or general election for federal office, any program the purpose of which is to systematically remove the names of ineligible voters from the official list of eligible voters. It says although Section 8 of the NVRA generally restricts states from removing ineligible registrants from the voter rolls within 90 days of a primary or general election, Congress permitted the removal of registrants who have died. Gee, there's a shock. It says according to Michigan law, at least once a month, the county clerk shall forward a list of the last known address and birth date of all persons over 18 years of age who have died within the county to the clerk of each city or township within the county. The city or township clerk shall compare this list with the registration records and cancel the registration of all deceased electors. Michigan's list maintenance activities have proven unreasonably inadequate to identify many registrants who are deceased, some of which have been deceased for a significant number of years, and been published in newspaper death notices. The foundation was able to find copies of death notices and pictures of grave markers for individuals included on the foundation's list of likely deceased registrants. So it looks like this is going to go on here for just a little bit. Question asked at the end says, will Michigan's dishonest Secretary of State be held accountable for her actions? And that's a good question. And I think that ultimately resides with the folks of Michigan. If you reside within the state of Michigan, you should be demanding this, if not for her resignation, right? We got to clean it up. We've seen time and time again, Judicial Watch lead campaigns like this, did it in California, clean up their voter rolls. Did it happen? Don't know. Same as playing out in Florida with over 1 million folks on the voter rolls. It shouldn't be there. Even whether you like DeSantis or not, it still needs to get done. And I would suspect that it's probably happening all across the country. So outside of that, Bill Gates still in the news. Insider paper as this says, Bill Gates warns world leaders to use germ games to prepare for bioterrorist attacks. That's out yesterday. So, as alluded to in a lot of the financial news here this morning, the fourth wave or third wave, the Delta variant waning, what do you think they're going to try and hit us with next? You think Bill Gates is kind of giving a signal here? I don't know. Bill Gates has warned of bioterrorist attacks and urged international authorities, including the World Health Organization, to prepare by engaging in germ games. Gates issued the warning on Wednesday during a policy exchange discussion with Jeremy Hunt, the chairman of the UK Health Select Committee. In a new interview, Gates urged world governments to invest billions in R&D to prepare for future pandemics and potential smallpox terror attacks, according to Sky News. Bill Gates urges to practice germ games, warns of bioterrorist attacks. Bill Gates suggested that germ games could be used to practice and prepare for such events. During the discussion, he also called for the creation of a new billion-dollar pandemic task force led by the World Health Organization. Well, that's like one and the same when you pretty much fund it there, Billy Boy, isn't it? It'll take probably about $1 billion a year for a pandemic task force at the WHO level, which is doing the surveillance and actually doing what I call germ games, where you practice, he said. You say, okay, what if a bioterrorist brought smallpox to 10 airports? How would the world respond to that? There's naturally caused epidemics and bioterrorism caused epidemics that could even be way worse than what we experience today. And yet, the advances in medical science should give us tools that, we could do dramatically better. He claims that, while countries such as the United Kingdom and the United States will have to spend billions of dollars, the end result could be the abolition of everything from the flu to the common cold. Interesting. I wonder how they think they're going to get away with that. Oh, you have to subscribe to Pfizer and all the rest of them and take, twice a year jabs? I don't know, just a thought. He continued, the nice thing is a lot of the R&D we need to do to be ready for the next pandemic are things like making vaccines cheap, having big factories, eradicating the flu, getting rid of the common cold, making vaccines just a little patch you put on your arm, are things that will be incredibly beneficial even in the years when we don't have pandemics. Gates stated that pandemic preparations will be a major focus of his future work. So, along with the climate message and the ongoing fight against diseases of the poor, pandemic preparedness is something I'll be talking about a lot. And I think it'll find fertile ground because, we lost trillions of dollars and millions of lives, and citizens expect their governments not to let that happen again. Well, trillions of dollars to who? The working class, the blue-collar folks, while all the fintechs and the parasites at the top have siphoned all that off? I talked a little bit about, the vaccine passports and who's behind that. Same cast of characters, right? And of course, all that data that's fed into all these surveillance systems, who benefits out of all that? Cui bono? Well, certainly these guys do. So here's a clip. I'll let a little bit of this play through.
And are we doing things now, or rather, are we not doing things now that we really need to be doing in preparation for the next pandemic?
Yeah, so it was 2015 that I gave the TED Talk and wrote a number of papers titled "We're Not Ready for the Next Pandemic." And sadly, that was a better forecast of what would happen than anyone would have wished for. The economic damage, the deaths, it's been completely horrific. And I would expect that will lead the R&D budgets to be focused on things we didn't have today. We didn't have vaccines that block transmission. We got vaccines that help you with your health, but they only slightly reduce the transmissions. We need a new way of doing the vaccines. We didn't get much in the way of therapeutics. Dexamethasone and now molnupiravir could help, but way less than should have been the case. We didn't get the diagnostics up and running in order to achieve what at least Australia and New Zealand showed, that competent management could keep the death rate down pretty dramatically. And so I'm hoping in 5 years I can write a book called, We Are Ready for the Next Pandemic. But it'll take tens of billions in R&D that the US and the UK will be part of that. It'll take probably about $1 billion a year for a pandemic task force at the WHO level, which is doing the surveillance and actually doing what I call germ games, where you practice. You say, okay, what if a bioterrorist brought smallpox to 10 airports? How would the world respond to that? That there's naturally caused epidemics and bioterrorism caused epidemics that could even be way worse than what we experience today. And yet the advances in medical science should give us tools that we could do dramatically better. So you'd think this would be a priority. The next year will be where those allocations have to get made, including this global pandemic task force. The nice thing is a lot of the R&D we need to do to be ready for the next pandemic are things like making vaccines cheap, having big factories, eradicating the flu, getting rid of the common cold, making vaccines just a little patch you put on your arm, things that will be incredibly
Yeah, I think
beneficial even in the years when we don't have pandemics. So, along with the climate message and the ongoing fight against disease of the poor, the pandemic preparedness is something I'll be talking about a lot. And I think it'll find fertile ground because, we lost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. And, citizens expect their governments not to let that happen again.
citizens expect their governments not to let that happen again. Interesting. So yes, do we as citizens need our government to intervene on our behalfs and tell us exactly how we should take care of our own selves? No, I don't think so, Bill. I think you're a little short-sighted on that. And by the way, I think the day is probably quickly coming where people will quickly realize that all this business of selling out our data for your profit, yeah, I think people are going to quickly realize that that's going to come to an abrupt halt. So, in any case, that's in the words of old Billy Boy Gates here this morning. And last but not least on the morning out of Amaland says Brownells launches new How to Build an AR-15 interactive video series. So, it's the weekend. I'll talk a little bit about some firearms here this morning. And of course, the other day you had some liberal heads explode over the fact that an outfit down in South Carolina came out with some blowers and that had the Let's Go Brandon on the pew pew side of things. Your little selector switch had Let's Go and on the old boom selector there. So I find this rather interesting. In the face of growing online censorship across many popular social media sites, Brownells has launched a new internet resource to help customers learn how to build their own AR-15 rifles at home. Ooh, ghost guns. Scary. Hosted at brownells.com, How to Build. The new website features step-by-step interactive videos professionally filmed in the famous Brownells Video Studio. Featuring Brownells gun tech Caleb Savant, the videos detail the AR-15 build process with easy-to-follow directions and expert advice. Several social media platforms have banned videos and other content showing how to build firearms, said Brownells VP of Marketing Ryan Repp. Because of Brownell's long-time support of the Second Amendment and individual freedom, it makes sense for us to create a professionally produced video and resource center to assist rifle builders of all skill levels make the rifle of their dreams in the comfort of their own home or workshop. The videos have an easy search button on the upper left-hand corner, allowing viewers to jump quickly to specific chapters to find the information they need. Titles include How to Build Your AR Introduction, How to Build Your Lower, and How to Build Your Upper. There is also a video on how to properly test fire and troubleshoot an AR-15 once it's built. In addition to the instructional videos, the site also hosts links to popular and in-stock parts, tools, and accessories required to build an AR-15 rifle at home. And of course, we can go right here to How to Build. Yeah, let's see if this comes up. And there we go. AR build, AR-15 build made easy. I got that one, how to build your lower. Oh, here's some lower parts for those that are interested, how to build your upper. And it looks like they've got, of course, everything linked right back to their Brownells store, of course. Nice little marketing campaign. Hit the range, test fire, troubleshoot, all that good stuff. So, not too shabby. So, that's going to do it for the broadcast this morning. Figured I'd end that on a bit of a high note for all your do-it-yourselfers net out there that might be interested in building your very own ghost gun, you know. But there's 6 different ways to skin a cat, so there's that. Anyway, that's going to do it for the broadcast here this morning. Appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, we'll be back here next week, same time, same bat channel, with all the latest in regards to what's going on in the financial world. And if by chance you happen to be around later on this afternoon, you can head over to old WTPI. I'll be joining 412 and the rest of the crew over there for that. So that being said, take care. God bless everybody.